Welcome back, listeners, to Sandman Stories Presents, a folklore podcast where I read you to sleep or until the next story. I'm your host, Dustin. Today, in episode 259, we are back in the book of Bengali folklore, written down by Lal Behari Day. It reminds me of a Shimla village story called Fate. Do children survive due to parental love, or through fate? Okay, let's begin. The story of Prince Sobur. Once upon a time there lived a merchant who had 7 daughters. One day the merchant asked his daughters a question. By whose fortune do you get your living? The eldest daughter answered, Papa, I get my living by your fortune. The same answer was given by the second daughter, the third, the fourth, the fifth, and the sixth, but his youngest daughter said, I get my living by my own fortune. The merchant got very angry with the youngest daughter and said to her, As you are so ungrateful as to say that you get your living from your own fortune, let me see how you fare alone. This very day you shall leave my house without a piece in your pocket. He promptly called his palki bearers and ordered them to take the girl away and leave her in the middle of a forest. The girl begged to be allowed to take her workbox containing her needle and thread with her. She was allowed to do so. Then she got into the palki, which the bearers lifted onto their shoulders. The bearers chanted, Hoon, 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 for only a few hundred meters, when an old woman bawled out at them and bid them to stop. On coming up to the palki, she said, Where are you taking away my daughter? For she was the nurse of the merchant's youngest child. The bearers replied, The merchant has ordered us to take her away and leave her in the midst of a forest, and we are going to do his bidding. I must go with her, said the old woman. How will you be able to keep pace with us, as we must run, said the bearers. Anyhow, I must go where my daughter goes, rejoined the old woman. The upshot was that, at the entreaty of the merchant's youngest daughter, the old woman was put inside the palki along with her. In the afternoon the palki bearers reached a dense forest. They went far into it, and towards sunset they put down the girl and the old woman at the foot of a large tree, and retraced their steps homeward. The case of the merchant's youngest daughter was truly pitiable. She was scarcely 20 years old. She had been bred in the lap of luxury, and now she was here at sundown in the heart of what seemed an infinite forest, with not a penny in her pocket, and with no other protection than what could be given to her by a kind old woman. The very trees of the forest looked upon her with pity. The gigantic tree, at whose foot she was mingling her tears with those of the old woman, said to her, for in those days the trees could speak, Unhappy girl, I pity you very much. In a short time the wild beasts of the forest will come out from their lairs and roam around for their prey. They are sure to devour you and your companion. But I can help you. I will make an opening for you in my trunk. When you see the opening, go into it. I will then close it up, and you will remain safe inside, nor can the wild beasts touch you. In a moment, the trunk of the tree split into two. The merchant's daughter and the old woman went inside the hollow tree, on which the tree resumed its original shape. When the shades of the night darkened the forest, the wild beasts came out of their lairs. The fierce tiger was there, the wild boar was there, the hard-skinned rhinoceros was there, the bushy bear was there, the musty elephant was there, and the horned buffalo was there. They all growled around the tree, for they got the scent of human blood. The merchant's daughter and the old woman heard from within the tree the growl of the beasts. The beasts came dashing against the tree. They broke its branches, they pierced its trunk with their horns, they scratched its bark with their claws, but in vain. The merchant's daughter and her old nurse were safe within. Towards dawn, the wild beasts went away. After sunrise, the good tree said to the two inmates, Unhappy women, The wild beasts have gone to their lairs after greatly tormenting me. The sun is up. You can now come out." So saying, the tree split itself into two, and the merchant's daughter and the old woman came out. They saw the extent of the mischief done by the wild beasts to the tree. Many of its branches had been broken. In many places the trunk had been pierced, and in other places the bark had been stripped off. The merchant's daughter said to the tree, "Good tree, you are truly good to give us shelter at such a terrible cost. You must be in great pain from the torture of which the wild beasts subjected you to last night." So saying, she went to the tank, which was near the tree, and bringing then a quantity of mud, she besmeared it on the trunk, especially those parts which had been pierced and scratched. After she had done this, the tree said, "Thank you, my good girl. I am now greatly relieved of my pain. I am, however, concerned not so much about myself as both of you. You must be hungry, not having eaten the whole of yesterday. And what can I give you? I have no fruit of my own to give you. Give the old woman whatever money you have, and let her go into the city and buy some food." They said they had no money. On searching, however, in the workbox she found 5 cowries. The tree then told the old woman to go with the cowries to the city and buy some kai, which is food. The old woman went to the city, which was not far, and said to one confectioner, "Please give me 5 cowries worth of kai." The confectioner laughed at her and said, "Be off, you old hag! Do you think kai can be had for 5 cowries?" She tried another shop, and the shopkeeper, thinking the woman to be in great distress, compassionately gave her a large quantity of kai for 5 cowries. When the old woman returned with the kai, the tree said to the merchant's daughter, "Each of you eat a little of the kai. Lay out more than half, and cast the rest all around the embankments of the tank." They did as they were bid, though they did not understand the reason why they were told to scatter the kai on the sides of the tank. They spent the day bewailing their fate, and at night they were housed inside the trunk of the tree as on the previous night. The wild beasts came as before, further mutilated the tree, and tortured it as in the preceding night. But during the night a scene was being enacted on the embankments of the tank, of which the 2 women saw the outcome only on the following morning. Hundreds of peacocks, of gorgeous plumes, came to the embankments to eat the kai which had been strewn for them, and as they strove with each other for the many tempting food, many of their plumes fell off their bodies. Early in the morning, the tree told the 2 women to gather the plumes together, out of which the merchant's daughter made a beautiful fan. This fan was taken to the city of the palace, where the son of the king admired it greatly, and paid a large sum of money for it. As each morning a quantity of plumes was collected, every day one fan was made and sold, so that in a short time the 2 women got rich. The tree then advised them to employ men in building a house for them to live in. Accordingly, bricks were burnt, trees were cut down for beams and rafters, bricks were reduced to powder, lime was manufactured, and in a few months a stately palace-like house was built for the merchant's daughter and her old nurse. It was thought advisable to lay out the adjoining grounds as a garden, and to dig a tank for supplying them with water. In the meantime, the merchant himself with his wife and 6 daughters had been frowned upon by the goddess of wealth. By a sudden stroke of misfortune he lost all of his money. His house and his property were sold, and he and his wife and 6 daughters were turned adrift penniless into the world. It so happened that they lived in a village not far from the place where the 2 strange women had built a palace and were digging a tank. As the once rich merchant was now supporting his family by the pittance which he obtained every day for his manual labor, he thought of employing himself as a day laborer in digging the tank of the strange lady on the skirts of the forest. His wife said she would also go and dig the tank with him. So one day, while the strange lady was amusing herself in the window of the palace by looking at her laborers digging the tank, to her utter surprise, she saw her father and mother coming towards the palace, and apparently to engage themselves as day laborers. Tears ran down her cheeks as she looked at them, for they were clothed in rags. She immediately sent servants to bring them inside the house. The poor man and woman were frightened beyond measure. They saw that the tank was already finished, and as it was customary in those days to offer a human sacrifice when digging was over, they thought that they were to be called inside in order to be sacrificed. Their fears increased when they were told to throw away their rags and put on fine clothes which were given to them. The strange lady of the palace, however, soon dispelled their fears, for she told them that she was their daughter, and fell upon their necks and wept. The rich daughter related her adventures, and the father felt that she was right when she said that she lived upon her own fortune and not that of her father. She gave her father a large fortune which enabled him to go to the city in which he formerly lived, and to set himself up again as a merchant. The merchant now thought of sailing to distant countries for the purposes of trade. All was ready. He got on board, ready to start, but, strange to say, the ship would not move. The merchant was at a loss as to what to make of this. At last he remembered that he had asked each of his 6 daughters who were living with him what things she wished he could bring back for her. But he had not asked the question of the 7th daughter, who had made him rich. He therefore immediately sent forth a messenger to his youngest daughter, asking her what she wished for her father to bring her on his return from his mercantile travels. When the messenger arrived, she was engaged in her devotions, and hearing that a messenger had arrived from her father, she said for him to Sobur, meaning wait. The messenger understood that she wanted her father to bring her something called Sobur. He returned to the merchant and told him that she wanted him to bring for her Sobur. The ship now moved by itself, and the merchant started on his travels. He visited many ports, and by selling his goods obtained immense profit. The things his 6 daughters wanted him to bring for them he easily got, but Sobur, the thing which he understood his youngest daughter wished to have, he could not get anywhere. He asked at every port whether Sobur could be had there, but the merchants all told him that they had never heard of such an article of commerce. At the last port he went through the streets bawling out, "Wanted Sobur! Wanted Sobur!" The cry attracted the notice of the son of the king of that country, whose name was Sobur. The prince, hearing from the merchant that his daughter wanted Sobur, said that he had the article in question, and bringing out a small box of wood containing a magical fan with a looking-glass in it, said, "This is Sobur, which your daughter wishes to have." The merchant, having obtained the long-wished-for Sobur, weighed anchor and sailed for his native land. On his arrival he sent to his youngest daughter the wonderful box. The daughter, thinking it to be a common wooden box, laid it aside. Some days later, when she was relaxing, she thought to herself about opening the box which her father had sent to her. When she opened it, she saw in it a beautiful fan, and in it a looking-glass. As she shook the fan, in a moment Prince Sobur stood before her and said, "You called me, here I am. What is your wish?" The merchant's daughter, astonished at the sudden appearance of the prince of such exquisite beauty, asked who he was, and how he made his appearance there. The prince told her of the circumstances under which he gave the box to her father, and informed her of the secret that whenever the fan would be shaken, he would make his appearance. The prince lived for a day or 2 in the house of the merchant's daughter, who entertained him hospitably. The upshot was that they fell in love with each other, and vowed to each other to be husband and wife. The prince returned to his royal father, and told him that he had selected a wife for himself. The day for the wedding was fixed. The merchant and his 6 daughters were invited. The nuptial knot was tied, but there was death in the marriage bed. The 6 daughters of the merchant, envying the happy lots of their youngest sister, had determined to put an end to the life of her newly wedded husband. They broke several bottles, reduced the broken pieces to fine powder, and scattered it profusely on the bed. The prince, suspecting no danger, laid down on the bed, but had scarcely been there for 2 minutes when he felt acute pain through his whole system, for the fine bottled powder had gone through every pore in his body. As the prince became restless with pain, and shrieked aloud, his attendants hastily took him away to his own country. The king and the queen, the parents of Prince Sobur, consulted all the physicians and surgeons of the kingdom, but in vain. The young prince was day and night screaming with pain, and no one could ascertain the disease, far less give him relief. The grief of the merchant's daughter may be imagined. The marriage knot had been scarcely tied when her husband was attacked, as she thought, by a terrible disease and carried away many hundreds of miles off. Though she had never seen her husband's country, she was determined to go there and nurse him. She put on the garb of a sannyasi and pretended to be a man, and with a dagger in her hand she set out on her journey. She was so young and unaccustomed to the long journeys on foot that she soon got weary and sat beneath a tree to rest. On the top of the tree was the nest of the divine bird Biangama and his mate Biangami. They were not in their nest at the time, but two of their young ones were in it. Suddenly the young ones in the top of the tree gave a scream, which roused the half-drowsy merchant's daughter, whom we shall now call the young traveling mystic. She saw nearby a huge serpent raising its hood and about to climb into the tree. In a moment she cut the serpent in two, on which the young birds left off screaming. Shortly after, Biangama and Biangami came sailing through the air, and the latter said to the former, "I suppose our offspring, as usual, have been devoured by the great enemy, the serpent. Ah me, I do not hear the cries of my young ones." On nearing the nest, however, they were agreeably surprised to find their offspring alive. The young ones told their dams how the young sannyasi under the tree had destroyed the serpent. And sure enough, the snake was lying there, cut in two. The Biangami then said to her mate, "The young sannyasi has saved our offsprings from death. I wish we could do him some service in return." The Biangama replied, "We shall presently do her a service, for the person under the tree is not a man, but a woman. She got married only last night to Prince Sobur, who, a few hours after, when jumping into his bed, had every pore of his body pierced with the fine particles of gram bottles, which had been spread over his bed by his envious sisters-in-law. He is still suffering in pain in his native land, and indeed is at the point of death. And his heroic bride, taking the garb of the sannyasi, is going to nurse him." "But," asked Biangami, "is there no cure for the prince?" "Yes, there is," replied Biangama. "If our dung which is lying about on the ground, and which is hardened, be reduced to powder and applied to the body of the prince by means of a brush, after bathing him 7 times with 7 jars of water and 7 jars of milk, Prince Sobur will undoubtedly get well." "But," asked the Biangami, "how can the poor daughter of a merchant walk such a distance? It must take her days, by which the poor prince will have died." Biangama replied, "I can take the young lady on my back and put her in the capital of Prince Sobur, and bring her back, provided she does not take any presents there." The merchant's daughter, in the garb of the sannyasi, heard the conversation between the two birds, and begged the Biangama to take her on his back. To this the bird readily consented. Before mounting on her aerial car, she gathered a quantity of the bird's dung and reduced it to a fine powder. Armed with this potent drug, she got back upon the back of the kind bird and sailed through the air with the rapidity of lightning, soon reaching the capital of Prince Sobur. The young sannyasi went up to the gate of the palace and sent word to the king that he was acquainted with potent drugs and would cure the prince in a few hours. The king, who had tried all the best doctors in the kingdom without success, looked upon the sannyasi as a mere pretender, but on the advice of his counselors agreed to give him a trial. The sannyasi ordered 7 jars of water and 7 jars of milk to be brought out to him. He poured the contents of all the jars on the body of the prince. He then applied by the means of a feather the dung powder which had already been prepared for every pore of the prince's body. Thereafter 7 jars of water and 7 jars of milk were again 6 times poured upon him. When the prince's body was wiped, he felt perfectly well. The king ordered that the richest treasures he had should be presented to the wonderful doctor, but the sannyasi refused to take any. He only wanted a ring from the prince's finger to preserve as a memorial. The ring was readily given to him. The merchant's daughter hastened back to the shore, where the Biangama was awaiting for her. In a moment they reached the tree of the divine birds, hence the young bride walked to her house on the skirts of the forest. The following day she shook the magical fan, and forthwith Prince Sobur appeared before her. When the lady showed him the ring, he learned with infinite surprise that his own wife was the doctor that had cured him. The prince took his bride off to his palace in his far-off kingdom, forgave his sisters-in-law, lived happily for scores of years, and was blessed with children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Thus my story endeth. The Nadia thorn withereth, etc. The end. I really liked the story. It was enjoyable from beginning to end. I did get tripped up on some of the long sentences where it's like 4 or 5 sentences and then the words are reversed in order because that's how they wrote back then. But it reminds me of a story previously where the gods are in the tree and there are birds and they tell how to cure a prince. I think it was in the Shimla Village Tales. Anyways, these stories always make me happy because they have a happy ending, and I look forward to continuing with this book. There are still 14 stories left in this book, so it'll be around for a hot minute. And the podcast shout-out is to Death by DVD. This is a podcast covering horror movies that many people have never heard of. Hank, or what's left of him, goes through hours of horror and gives you a great breakdown. I've never been a horror fan, but hearing the passion and expertise about the genre keeps me fascinated. And if you like the show as much as I do, go and give them a listen, a rating, and a review. And the listener shout-out is to a special place in my heart, Haiphong, Vietnam. I visited Ha Long Bay, which is just outside of Haiphong, during a holiday over a decade ago. I didn't get to see much of the city itself, but rather got on one of the boats that was rented out by the hostel where I was staying at. It was a lot of fun on that boat, learning what the Dutch think of Edam cheese, how dangerous soju in a water bottle is, and having a great time jumping off the top deck of the boat into the water. One day I'll go back there and explore more, but until then, I will say to my one listener in Haiphong, Kamon ba chuk nong nong. Thank you, and good night.